Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, or if you are new, welcome. If this is your first time here, hi, my name is Kelsey. I am a wife and a mom of 3 kids, ages 6, 4, and almost 2, and my husband and I recently found out that we are expecting baby number 4 in November. I recently started this channel to record pregnancy updates and upload other pregnancy and motherhood related content. So if you're interested in any of that content, please subscribe and let's get into today's video. This video is going to be all about my pregnancy with my oldest son, Leland. Leland is 6 years old now, almost 7, which is crazy to believe. Fortunately, for myself and for him someday, I do remember quite a lot of the details about his pregnancy and birth because it was my first pregnancy. I was super excited. I took tons of notes that I still have, which I'm so thankful for. Like, thank you, self, for doing that. So happy. I didn't have other kids distracting me. So yeah, I do have a lot of details about his pregnancy and birth. You'll probably find as I upload like my pregnancy recaps for my son Rhett and my daughter Hattie, I don't remember quite as much specific information about their pregnancies, which I know is common for like second, third, and subsequent kids, but like it still gives me mom guilt that I don't remember those details. I feel like at the time you just think you'll remember everything, and apparently once motherhood sets in and you have 3 little kids running around, you just don't remember. So anyway, I will do my best. But for this video talking about Leland's pregnancy, I do have quite a few details to share. As a lot of you guys may have already seen, I recently recorded a video talking all about my husband and my trying to conceive journey. And so if you're interested in kind of all the events and our history that led up to conceiving Leland, definitely go watch that. It was a very detailed video where I talked about trying to conceive all of our babies and just our whole journey. So it was very comprehensive. If you're looking for more information about that, definitely check that video out. I will put a link to that down below so that it's easy to find for you. Just for a super abbreviated quick recap, I do have PCOS. I did have really irregular periods and was concerned about how our trying to conceive journey would go. After a while of trying on our own, we ended up seeing a doctor and going on clomid for 3 months. On the 3rd month, I had no symptoms. I was sure I wasn't pregnant and already feeling depressed, thinking about what our next steps would have to be. And that is when I took a pregnancy test just for kicks and got a positive at 10 DPO. So that was kind of where the TTC video left off. So I will jump right in there, right here. I hope that made sense. When I got the positive pregnancy test, I was obviously so over the moon excited. It was very surreal. I can remember from the adrenaline, just like my hands were shaking, my legs were shaking. I had to just sit down and take a few deep breaths because I just couldn't believe it. I remember I ended up going to the gym to try to work out to distract myself and bought a whole bunch more pregnancy tests while I was out. Came home, took like 2 more kinds to compare, and they were all positive. I was super excited, like I said, but just so nervous. I think it's normal for everyone to be a little bit nervous in early pregnancy, but especially when you've struggled to conceive, albeit for us a fairly easy TTC journey in the grand scheme of things. There's always that small sense of fear of something going wrong. So I was cautiously optimistic, I will say. I did get my husband a whole bag of like snacks, pretty much junk food snacks, while I was at the store, along with a card that I made. And it just said basically, so I can't remember exactly what it said. I'll have to dig it out sometime and find a picture, but it said like, we did it, I think. And then it said, if I'm gonna get fat, you're gonna get fat too, or something. And it took him a minute to like get it, but then I also had the test and a little onesie wrapped up in there. So he saw that, and then he definitely understood, and we were just excited. I remember just hugging and crying and being like in shock together, but it was a very blissful shock. I immediately called my doctor's office that same day, and they sent me right away for a blood test. So they monitored me for like the first week or two, I think, for my HCG and progesterone levels. So if anyone's interested, I will just read those off right now. I have a notebook here, so if you see me looking down, that's why. At 10 DPO, when I got my positive test, my progesterone was, or I'm sorry, my HCG was 32 and my progesterone was 49.8. 4 days later, at 14 DPO, my HCG was 251 and my progesterone was 57.9. At 16 DPO, which was 2 days after that, my HCG was 536, and I don't think they checked my progesterone because I didn't have that written down. And at 23 DPO, my HCG was 8,049 and my progesterone was 34.6. The very first symptom that I had, which is so funny to me to this day, is that I was craving meat of any sort, especially red meat. I was never anemic, so I know that's the first thing that people's minds go to, but I was not. I'm not usually a huge meat eater. Like, I'm definitely not a vegetarian, and I do eat meat, but if given the choice, usually between meat or something else, I would tend to pick the other thing. And so that was bizarre for me. I remember eating pot roast that we had left over at like 7 in the morning one morning that first week, and just like crying because I was probably so hormonal, and just like crying because I didn't know why I was eating pot roast at 7 in the morning, but it just tasted so good. So yeah, that was definitely new and interesting to me, and still funny to this day. I went on that pregnancy to continue craving meat throughout a lot of it. I probably ate more meat during pregnancy than I ever did before I was pregnant. My major cravings other than meat throughout Leon's pregnancy that I can remember having were blue cheese dressing, which I know you can only eat the kind that's made with pasteurized cheese, so that is what I did, but I definitely loved blue cheese when I was pregnant with him, which is funny because I was never really a person that liked blue cheese prior to that. And ice and or ices. I know, once again, that can be a sign of anemia, but like I said, I was never anemic, but I would just crave like ice cold water, ice cold Gatorade, or any drink that was ice cold or just plain ice. And then ices that you get from, like, around here there's some gas stations that have ices, or other places sometimes have them. I loved those, especially cherry ones. And so yeah, throughout my pregnancy, those were the three things that I just found myself going back to repeatedly. Interestingly enough, during Leland's pregnancy especially, I had a really big aversion to cereal, which I've always liked cereal and eaten like a decent amount. I don't eat it every day by any means, but it was really weird. I just couldn't. It was almost like a texture thing, just like the milk on the cereal and then it getting soggy just really grossed me out when I was pregnant. So I think maybe during Leland's pregnancy I might have had like 1 or 2 bowls of cereal, and that was it. Other kind of main symptoms that I had with Leland's pregnancy was insane fatigue during the first trimester, as well as some headaches during the first trimester. I had pretty bad acne for a while that eventually did clear up, but I'm sure that was just related to the hormones. And I had horrible constipation. Probably TMI, I'm sorry, but you are watching a pregnancy channel. But yeah, I have never struggled so much with constipation in my life, and I didn't know that it could even be that bad. Looking back, I think I was probably chronically dehydrated when I got pregnant with Leland. I just never really made a point to drink a ton of water, which sadly I think a lot of people are probably chronically dehydrated and don't realize how much water your body actually needs. So I think that probably played a huge part in it, but yeah, I was miserable. I had to end up taking like Colace and Miralax and Metamucil like every single day, just to have any prayer of staying comfortable, and drink a ton of apple juice and different like foods that are supposed to keep you regular. So that was probably my most bothersome symptom throughout my pregnancy with him. I didn't really have morning sickness. I remember a few times with Leland just feeling like mildly nauseous in the first trimester, but nothing like I feared it could be. When my mom was pregnant with me, I know she had hyperemesis and was miserable and had to be hospitalized all the time to get IV hydration and IV medications. So I was really worried that if there was any kind of genetic component that I would struggle with the same things. But fortunately for me, that was not an issue, and I just kind of sailed right through without any morning sickness. When I was 5 weeks pregnant, I switched OBs. I think I might have touched on this before in one of my other videos, but I did like my doctor that I was seeing prior to getting pregnant. However, for one, for insurance reasons, it made more sense for me to switch. And for two, I just felt like their practice was too big and really just kind of swallowed you up and you fell through the cracks. The doctors seemed really nice, but in order to like talk to a doctor if you had a question or anything, it was just such a process trying to call the office, and you'd always talk to somebody different, and I just didn't always like the answers that they were giving me. So I decided to switch. I did a ton of research and ended up finding an OB that I love, and so I'm very thankful for that. They got me right in at the new one for an appointment, and he actually did an ultrasound. It was right around 5 weeks pregnant. So I knew that I wouldn't be able to see a heartbeat yet, but he did an ultrasound and we could see the gestational sac. So that was definitely reassuring. And yeah, I was thankful to have found him early on in my pregnancy so that I could get established there and have some consistency throughout the rest of my pregnancy. At 6 weeks and 1 day, he had me go back in for another appointment where they did another ultrasound. And at that point, we saw the sweetest little heartbeat, which was one of the most relieving things in the world and just so surreal and exciting. They also checked my progesterone at that appointment, and I think it was 31, which was just a tiny bit lower than it had been the previous time they checked it a couple weeks earlier. So because of that, he did start me on progesterone supplements, since he said women with PCOS are more likely to have problems with progesterone levels and an increased risk of miscarriage sometimes because of that. So he put me on those just to be safe, and I took those throughout my first trimester. At 9 weeks, I ended up having a little bit of a bleeding scare. Looking back, I don't think it was really that big of a deal. It was just a tiny bit of blood one time when I went to the bathroom and wiped that I saw on the toilet paper. So just, I guess, a little bit of spotting is what I would call it. But anytime you're pregnant and see blood, it can definitely be, anxiety producing. So I went right into the doctor. He was worried about my cervix shortening, like if I had an incompetent cervix or something. So he did do an ultrasound. They measured my cervix. It was measuring fine, and they couldn't see any reason for the bleeding. So they said it was probably just some kind of irritation that had caused that, and that it wasn't concerning as long as it didn't continue. At 16 weeks and 1 day pregnant, I felt Leland kick for the first time, and it's so funny. I can vividly remember exactly where I was. I was sitting at a computer at work doing some charting, and all of a sudden I felt like some little flutters that I wasn't sure if they were him moving or not previously, but I just felt like this one jab, it just felt like that. And I remember thinking like that was definitely the baby. And at the time there was a doctor that was talking to me, and I can just remember like he was talking about something probably not that important, and I like just zoned out completely and was like, oh my gosh, I just felt my baby, this is so exciting. And then I had to like zone back into what he was saying, and then he just happened to ask me like, have you been feeling the baby move yet? And I told him like I just felt it for the first time. So Anyway, that was special. And then like 4 days after that, so still during my 16th week, my husband and I were laying in bed one morning and he had his hand on my stomach and he actually felt him kick from the outside too. So yeah, that week was really special. I think like I'm always just so fascinated and enamored by baby movement, but especially just like those very first kicks that you feel are just like magical. Around 19 weeks, I had my anatomy scan. He was perfect, although they did tell us that he might have a club foot. They couldn't tell in the ultrasound if it was just the way that he had his leg bent and crossed or if he had a club foot. So that was a little like unnerving, I guess I'll say. I wasn't really worried about it because it's not like that is a super serious thing. Like it's definitely something that needs medical attention and needs to be corrected, but it wasn't something that was going to be life altering. And they did tell us like there's a good chance that it's just, you know, how he's laying. So it wasn't really that big of a deal, but definitely just something that we had in the back of our mind throughout the rest of the pregnancy until he was born. At that ultrasound also, we found out that he was a boy, and that was really exciting. I didn't really have a preference at all, but I always told my husband I didn't want to have all girls. I wanted to have at least one boy, and I always wanted an older brother growing up. So the fact that I knew that if we had a daughter down the line, she would have an older brother, just made me really happy. So we were over the moon excited when we found out that he was a boy. A couple days after our anatomy scan, we went on a babymoon to Florida. Looking back, I'm so glad that we did that. It was just such a sweet time. By that point, we could really feel him moving around and kicking, and so it was just really special to be together and have time to like slow down, focus on each other, focus on just being together and bonding over the fact that we were expecting our precious little boy, and just really soak up that last special time together before life got super chaotic and before it was so far along in the pregnancy that I was like really uncomfortable and unable to travel well. At 28 weeks pregnant, I passed my gestational diabetes test, which was a relief, and unfortunately I also had to have the rhogam shot, which was because I have O negative blood. Honestly, it was not a big deal, and I've come to learn since then, you know, I've had it multiple times now with multiple pregnancies, and it's really no big deal, but I definitely like made it up to be this huge awful thing in my head, and was freaking out that it was going to be so painful, and then it was like hardly anything when they actually gave it to me. So I guess that was a relief, but looking back, a lot of unnecessary anxiety. I guess I should mention too, during my pregnancy with Leland, we were in a house that was kind of a fixer-upper, and my husband was completely gutting and redoing everything in our kitchen. So for probably almost half my pregnancy, since he was doing it like intermittently around work and everything, we didn't have a functional kitchen. Obviously we like had our refrigerator and a microwave and a little like hot plate thing that you could boil stuff on, and a convection oven that was like a little one like this, and we had to like wash the dishes in our bathroom, and it was definitely stressful. I remember stressing out because I wasn't eating like the same kinds of things that I would necessarily be eating if we had a kitchen, and I was convinced because I was like microwaving so much stuff and all of this that he was gonna like come out with 3 heads or something. I don't know. Looking back, first time mom paranoia at its finest, but it definitely was stressful, and I think it was probably around when I was maybe like 34, 35 weeks pregnant when we finally had the whole thing finished, and that was such a relief, just in time for nesting, where I was like putting everything back in all the new kitchen cabinets and like feeling really on top of the world, being able to organize everything how I wanted it. But yeah, that was definitely like a big part of my pregnancy. When I was 32 weeks pregnant, I went in because of where the doctor found his heartbeat with the Doppler at that appointment. He told me that he was probably breech. just by where the heartbeat was and where, like, what he was feeling when he felt my stomach. So I was panicked. I definitely am not opposed to C-sections, particularly if they're medically necessary, because I do think that there are some situations where C-section is the best way for a baby to be born, and I would never be opposed to having one if that was the situation that I was in. However, the fact of just having my first pregnancy be breech when I knew I wanted, you know, to have multiple more children afterwards, and just knowing the fight that it would be to have to try for a VBAC after a C-section really freaked me out. It's interesting because that was 7 years ago, and even just like in the time since then, like in the past 7 years, VBACs have become a lot more accepted and common, which I'm thankful for those people that have had to have C-sections. But at the time, 7 years ago, there wasn't like many, if any, doctors around that really would even let you try for a VBAC. So I was worried that if I had one C-section, I would just be doomed to like multiple more C-sections, just because doctors were unwilling to let me try a VBAC. So after I found out that he was breech, I did all the tricks that you hear about to try to flip him in the next couple weeks. I remember like shining a flashlight on my stomach to try to get him to move. I remember, I want to say putting like heat or cold on my stomach. I don't even remember all the things I tried. Laying upside down on an ironing board sounds familiar. I don't know. I researched everything and tried everything short of going to a chiropractor because I couldn't really find one in my area that I felt comfortable with. So yeah, I tried all that and was completely convinced that he was going to stay breech and I was going to have a C-section. When I went in for my 34-week appointment, the doctor checked me and was shocked because his head was so low in my pelvis. And so at that point I remember saying like, well, does that mean he's not breech? And he said, oh no, he is definitely not breech. His head is already engaged in the birth canal. And with how low he is, I don't think you will ever make it to your due date. You need to just go home. You're not on bed rest, but you need to just relax and take it easy and try to keep him in there for a couple more weeks so that he isn't premature. So at that point, I remember I could definitely tell he was low after I found that out, because in the next weeks, like, I just felt so much pressure down below when I was like walking or sitting or anything. Like I could hardly sit down because it felt like I had a bowling ball between my legs. And I remember like having to pee non-stop, like every 5 minutes it felt like. But I also remember just being super relieved that he wasn't breech, and also going home and telling my husband like he's gonna be here sooner than later, and you know, being kind of stressed out with all the stuff that I was wanting to accomplish before he was born. Like just going home and kicking it into high gear to try to get all that stuff done. In the preceding weeks, it seemed like pretty much every time I went into the doctor, each week I was just progressively dilating, like a little more and a little more. I ended up getting to, I think the last appointment before I went into labor, I was like a loose 2, he called it, which I guess is like a little more than 2 centimeters. And so I was happy that I was, you know, progressively dilating. It was nice each week to hear that I had made a little bit of progress. One thing that I will say about Leland in utero is that he definitely was a stubborn baby, even from the start. He, with his movement, was stubborn. Like sometimes he would just not move at all, and I would be poking around and doing all the tricks to try to get him to kick. He definitely gave me multiple scares where I would like think I should be feeling him and I wasn't feeling anything, and I'd have to like do a bunch of stuff just to get him to move at all. At 39 weeks pregnant, I woke up one morning and I couldn't get him to move like at all. I tried all the tricks and I still couldn't feel much of anything. There was like 1 or 2 times I thought I might have felt him kick, but it wasn't like enough to even count it as a kick because I didn't know for sure if it was just something else moving around or like digestion. So I called my doctor and he told me to go right to labor and delivery. I remember we packed up our stuff quickly and went to the hospital. We were really worried that I would have to be induced because there was something wrong. I mean, first of all, we were just worried that, you know, something was wrong with him, but then I was worried that I would have to get induced and have him that day, which was just like, even though it was 39 weeks and we knew it could happen every day, it was just like shocking to think that it would actually be happening right then. And so we went in and they hooked me up to the monitors. Fortunately, on the way to the hospital, I did feel him kick like one good kick. So I knew he was still alive, but I was still really concerned, obviously. When I got there, they took me to triage and they hooked me up to the fetal monitor to track his movements. I was not having any contractions. And they were monitoring his movement and his heart rate, and they came back like maybe an hour, hour and a half later and said that he was having some heart rate accelerations, but not enough to consider him reactive, I think is what they call it. He wasn't like having enough variability in his heart rate for them to know that he was 100% healthy, although he was still pretty reactive, so it wasn't anything to be super concerned about. Which was kind of confusing, but basically before I could go home, they wanted to send me for an ultrasound at the maternal fetal medicine specialists that are attached to the hospital. So they took me over there, they did an ultrasound, they said he looked fine, my fluid level was great, he was not in any distress, he was actually doing the practice breathing that they do in utero, which they said is a sign that he was healthy and everything was going as it should. And then after that, he actually started moving around like crazy, which was what he would do. He would like go hours without hardly moving at all, to where I would be starting to get concerned, and then he would just go crazy for like an hour or two. So he started doing that, so they felt comfortable sending me home, and they just said, all right, well, we'll see you sometime soon. It was definitely a relief that he was okay and that we got to go home, but also I think I'd kind of just like in my head decided that, you know, just to err on the side of caution, they would probably just keep me and induce me anyway. So going home without a baby was like a little bit tough, but looking back, I mean, he would be born a week later, so it wasn't that much longer, but you know, when you're at the end of pregnancy, a week feels like an eternity. When I was 39 weeks and 6 days pregnant, my water ended up breaking, and that is how I went into labor with Leland and how I ended my pregnancy. I am planning to record a whole nother video with Leland's birth story because this video has gotten excessively long. So I'm going to end this video here, but I hope that you guys enjoyed hearing about my pregnancy with Leland. I will also be sure to record recaps of my second and third pregnancy for you guys here sometime soon as well, so that you can compare how all my pregnancies went if you're interested. Thank you so much for watching. I'm so happy to have you here and along on this journey with me. If you're interested in following along on my journey, please consider subscribing. Please also say hi in the comments down below or introduce yourself if we haven't met yet. I would love to hear any feedback that you guys have or any similarities or differences with your pregnancies. So yeah, please don't be shy down in the comments. Once again, thank you for watching, and I will be talking to you guys soon. Bye.